growing up in two worlds, it's two of everything. It's two religions, it's two lifestyles, two worldviews, two cultures, two languages. Having that divide meant that I didn't have a surefire identity. I didn't belong to either side. And so whenever I would go into a group of Arab Muslims, as soon as they find out that my mom is American Christian, oh, well, you know your mom's an idiot, right? It's the very first thing I would hear. But the same thing happened on the flip side. I would go into groups of American Christians just trying to make friends, and then they'd find out my father's Muslim, and you know your dad's going to hell, right?
Wow.
And this was the rhetoric. It was like, no matter where I went, I'm not one of them. So I asked my father for permission to study the Bible. I told him my plan, that I want to study both. I want to even study other world religions. I need to know where I stand on this. I just told him exactly what I was struggling with. And he gave me permission and requested that I studied Islam first. So I said, fair enough. So my journey started off with Islam, with studying Islam. So first thing that I did is I opened the Quran. I came to the conclusion that I was looking for truth. I wanted to understand reality. What is the world? Why is it this way?
Yeah.
Who am I? What is my part to play in that? I was looking for truth. This was a hard one for me personally. I was 17 years old when I decided that Islam was not true. I cried my eyes out that day because that meant there was always going to be that distance from my father.
Right.
That I'm never going to share that with him. I'm not going to have that connection with him. And that hurt because I'm a total daddy's girl.
Yeah.
And that realization came from realizing there is no paper trail to support the claims of Islam. In fact, the paper trail is contradicting it. That was largely a historical study that disproved Islam to me. No matter how many other sources I kept finding, it was the same thing. Because I didn't just take that with a grain of salt. I was like, okay, but let me find some other ones though. Didn't matter. Every angle I took it from, every book I read, every person I interviewed, every perspective and logical thought process that I went to, it all took me down that same extremely conclusive and supported conclusion that Islam was not true. That did not mean Christianity was. So when I was 17 is when I switched gears to just completely zeroing on Christianity. I'd already decided that the other worldviews did not hold water. Christianity was the only one that had the consistent through line. Islam it attached itself to Christianity, but it has a very specific start date. What was interesting about Christianity is that it was the only one that had a verifiable event attached to it. Like a historical verifiable event. The rest of them just kind of say Christianity is verifiable. And it was the only one that was. So I didn't want it to be true. I was hoping it wasn't. Everything that I was researching was like, okay, this makes sense, but there's got to be more. Okay, this makes sense, but there's got to be more. Okay, fine, I guess this all supports it, but let me read this other refute really quick though. And that was kind of how it was going towards the end for me, was I was looking for anything that might actually disprove this. And on the contrary, everything I found just continued to support it. So by the time I got a hold of this particular book, I didn't know what was holding me back. I had already come to the conclusion that so be it. If this ruins everything, this is the one thing I'm willing. I don't want that, but it's the one thing in my life that I'm willing to lose everything over. It's too important. It is the utmost importance.
Welcome back to the Get Back Podcast. I'm Zeke Pike. I'm here with my co-host, Greg Kelly.
All right. And today we have such a great guest. And it's funny because we kind of ran into her when we were at Red Rocks Church. We didn't really run into her. We got to hear your testimony. And we sat there and we looked up, and it was during baptism. And we saw this lady named Yasmin come up on the screen, and we were listening to all these testimonies, and they were all phenomenal testimonies with people that were fully giving themselves to Christ and wanted to take their faith to the next journey. And this woman's came up on the screen and started talking about her testimony of living within two worlds, and stuck in two worlds of two faiths between Muslim and Christianity. And I thought that was always really interesting. And so when we heard about it, we're like, whoa, she captivated the whole sanctuary. And we looked over at our producer who was with us. It was like, hey, we need to get her on the pod. She needs to come and tell her story because it's phenomenal. And so today we have Yasmin. How do you pronounce your last name?
Salama.
Yasmin Salama. Thank you so much for being on here, Yasmin. We can't wait to hear your story. We want to give you the floor. We want to just first start with telling us who you are, tell our audience who you are, where you grew up, your family, kind of your passions, and then we'll get into the faith part of it, which I'm excited for.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you guys so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah.
It's really crazy also just that it all happened through church.
Yeah.
Church.
Just to be able
Yeah.
to share my story like that. And that was the first time that I had ever publicly shared
Yeah.
my story too. So yeah, I'm actually originally from California, born and raised in California, and then moved out here to Austin, goodness, almost 10 years ago now. So my entire adult life has been here. My entire faith life has been here in Austin as well. And I primarily do marketing as my full-time job to pay the bills and to support my passions of music and writing. I'm a composer and a published author. So that's everything that I kind of have just been doing and pursuing over the last 10 years, in addition to pursuing the growth in my faith and pursuing relationships with my family and continuing to just grow that and keep it going.
Wow. It's amazing. We want to go ahead and plug your book first before we do anything. The Crimson Run, you had, when did you publish this?
In March of this
In
year.
March.
It's brand new.
And what I love about that, because I'm writing my own book, and we were talking earlier before the podcast that I've always honored writers, and I want to know more about how you write. But tell the audience a little bit about your book and what inspired you to do the book.
Yeah, so my book it's a fiction steampunk mystery adventure. It's kind of Sherlock Holmes meets a series of unfortunate events. If I could compare them to mush those two together, and we got my book. And it has been a project that I've been working on since high school with my younger brother, actually. He is a phenomenal storyteller, and then I'm the writer. So put the two of us together and we crafted out the story of actually books 2 and 3. And then we realized that we had made a mistake with books 2 and 3, which was we wrote it from the wrong character's perspective. So switched things up, wrote book 1 with the character that is now the main character of what is going to be a planned trilogy. And it's been a project that brought my brother and I closer together and kind of combined our two passions. So it was so much fun to work on. 10-year pet project right there.
Wow.
Amazing.
Have you always been into, like, I'm assuming if you write fictional books, you have to be, as a kid growing up, like, you have to love reading books, like, I'm assuming, right? Or love video games, like storylines, right? You have to really love that fictional side. So, like, what was that for you as a kid? Was it books? Was it, I mean, I guess a little bit of both. Obviously, if we talk about the video games, but what was that like for you that, like, drew you into? You have to have an incredible imagination to just write books like this. So, like, what was that childhood? I'm assuming that.
Yeah, my childhood was a lot of storytelling, stories in any way I could take it, whether that was talking to people and learning their stories. Definitely read a lot of books. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Wheel of Time series. I read that when I was like 15. They're this big, just so you know.
Wow.
So yeah, I've been an avid reader ever since I was a kid, and an avid writer. I've been writing probably since I was 6 or 7 years old, and composing ever since I was 6 or 7 years old. And both of them kind of came together of just telling stories, either through writing or through music. And fortunately, they both complement each other very well. Gaming, for sure, was not just a way to connect with my family, but also learning how stories are told. What is the structure? What is the best way to convey who we are through stories? So I think storytelling is an incredibly important skill to learn for all of us, because we all have a story to tell.
Yeah.
And the better that you can craft it in a way that tells the message that you're trying to convey. That, to me, that's all through storytelling.
Yeah, and you're really good at it. And you I think it's more so you get to tell your own story. And me going through my own faith journey, and I know with him going through his own faith journey, and I think all of us as well on the other side of this camera, our audience, if you're going through your own faith journey, you exemplify what it means to put in the work to figure it out and to make a decision for yourself. I know a lot of times we can kind of hear something and just kind of be like, that sounds good, or maybe that can be comfortable, or that could make my life easier. And I don't think diving into your faith would make your life easier by any means. It just makes you kind of understand a little bit more the grand scheme of things, and not necessarily all of it, but you get to maybe do hard better. And I think you kind of get that sense of accomplishment of knowing that you're not just doing this life alone. And I want to talk about your faith and starting to lay the groundwork on you grew up in two worlds,
Mhm.
right? You grew up with a father who was Muslim and a mother who was Christian. Tell us from the very beginning how all that came about.
Yeah. So I want to start by just saying that my parents married young, and they're still married to this day. And they are absolutely crushing life, crushing marriage. They are an example of what marriage could be. They're both just exemplary examples of what their respective faiths have to offer and what it means to be dedicated to God and what you believe. And so growing up, that was what I saw. My father, being Muslim, wanted us, meaning my brothers and I, to be raised Muslim as well. My mom, through her own journey in faith, had decided to kind of back off on that and allow it. You know, she trusted God with it and did not want there to be friction or for there to be any kind of fighting in the home. And it very easily could have gone that route. So being a child of two worlds, if anybody who's listening to this has that situation, there is automatically going to be a tug of war, a friction in the family that is simply because nobody believes the same thing. It's inevitable. And one of the things I greatly appreciated about the way that my parents handled it is that they did their best not to allow that friction to divide us. There was no shortage of love in my home. No shortage of dedication to family. Both my parents were always there for us. Always, I was homeschooled, so they both like tag teamed teaching us and growing us up. My father was my soccer coach growing up. Amazing, like math whiz, taught me everything I know about math, which is great because I'm not a math person. So like both of them were just there. They were just always there and truly dedicated parents. And they were always united in that, in raising their children and raising us together. So no matter what the struggle was, they kept that away from us and allowed us to still have a childhood and still grow and still just have a really good childhood, which I did. But no matter how that played out or how respectful and kind and loving and everything that my family was, there was just always that elephant in the room that was religion and being raised Muslim. I personally never felt like I was Muslim, but it also wasn't really my decision to make at the time. It was kind of just, this is what I'm learning. This is what my father is teaching me. Okay. It was another subject in school, if you will, to me at that time, until it started to become a problem. It became a problem outside the home. So outside the home, I would be, again, being half, I'm not just, Islam and Christianity, I'm also half Middle Eastern, half American. There were two languages in the house. My father speaks Arabic, my mom speaks English. We primarily spoke English in the house, but growing up in two worlds, it's two of everything. It's two religions, it's two lifestyles, two worldviews, two cultures, two languages. Having that divide meant that I didn't have a surefire identity. I didn't belong to either side. And so whenever I would go into a group of Arab Muslims, as soon as they find out that my mom is American Christian, oh, well, you know your mom's an idiot, right? It's the very first thing I would hear. I'm like 8 years old. I'm just trying to make friends, right? So that was hurtful. That was a really hard thing to experience as an 8-year-old, and you don't even know what's going on. I was like, I'm literally just trying to play soccer right now. That's all. But the same thing happened on the flip side. I would go into groups of American Christians just trying to make friends, and then they'd find out my father's Muslim, and your dad's going to hell, right?
Wow.
And this was the rhetoric. It was like, no matter where I went, I'm not one of them. I'm welcome, but I'm not allowed to stay unless I make a clear declaration. And none of that was verbalized. This is all a feeling. It's all impressions. It's all, well, you're going to say that to me, and what does that make me feel? Like I have to pick a side. Like I have to defend my father. I have to defend my mother. And so everywhere I went, that was the case. I'm defending my family. So that meant that my brothers and I just got closer together. We kind of stopped pursuing the outside friendships as much and pursued each other. And so then we got really close, and it was something that nobody understood. Like it was kind of a unique situation. The handful of other people that we did know, their parents, like their marriage didn't make it, or their relationship picked one side. They just kind of were American. They were Arab. There was my family was unique in that we straddled the line. We wanted both. So for me, I never really struggled with my identity in that regard. I'm like, I'm both. Why is that a problem? Why is that not possible? It simply is.
Yeah.
But everybody else seemed to struggle with it. So the more pressure that I got from outside the family, the more that just got to me of, I don't know where I stand on this. And then the more that I'm learning about Islam, the more that's being pushed in within my family for, just to I don't know if you know anything about Islam, but there's a lot of specific steps that are taken. And so the less of those steps that I was involved in, the more than, for lack of a better way to put it, the more the judgment starts coming. It's the why. Well, why don't you pray 5 times a day?
Oh, yeah.
Why don't you wear hijab? Why don't you, it's these types of questions that you get hit with. And I didn't have an answer. Genuinely didn't have an answer. And that bothered me because it's a simple question. And yet it's taken as hostile to me because I didn't have an answer and I couldn't defend it. I couldn't back it up.
Yeah.
So within my family, when I was about 14 years old, I really started to question what I was learning. There was always this additional question of, yeah, but mom believes this though. Yeah, but there's Christianity over here. At that time, I wasn't allowed to read the Bible. I wasn't allowed to go to church. I was not around it. My mom was my only gateway, my only real even knowledge that there was another potential way.
How did that work?
Mm-hmm.
Like the relationship with them? Because like, how does that work? Like, if you're Muslim, are you even are you supposed, I'm assuming you probably aren't supposed to marry a Christian woman, right? Like, or is that like, how does that, like, how did that work for, as them growing? Like you guys, you and your brother, it was always kind of Muslim. Like that was what you were raised, like Christian was kind of like hidden from you guys, just so I understand.
Yeah. So my parents wanted to raise us both. Islamically, and I think a lot of this may actually be more Arab culture than it is Islamic. But there's not a lot of encouragement to marry outside the faith, but the man can marry a non-Muslim woman. The assumption is that she'll convert. Most of the time she does.
Gotcha.
In my case, that's not what happened. My mom actually did something very similar. She deep dived. She'd never really been exposed to Islam either, so she deep dived, and it just made her stronger in her faith. But they both wanted to stay married. They both were dedicated to their relationship and dedicated to us and to each other, and they wanted to work it out, and they did. And there's no, like, if it were the reverse, it wouldn't have happened. If the woman were Muslim trying to marry a non-Muslim guy, that doesn't happen.
Gotcha.
So for my situation, again, that was one of the things that made it unique, is that my parents stayed together, continued to love one another, continued to just want the best for us and want to raise us. And so within the home, I think had my mom not backed off, there would have been a whole lot more friction. But she respected my father's will. From her perspective, she'll often say that, she prayed and she read the Bible, and she's like, what do I do? My mom's a fighter. But everything that she kept getting was obey your husband, respect your husband. And like, that's not Americans don't want to hear that, know. But my mom heard it loud and clear, and she made that call. And I saw that as a child who was not Christian at the time. Seeing the way that my mom handled it as an actual Christian went miles with my faith.
Yeah.
Your mom seemed very strong-willed.
Yeah.
And she seems, it's amazing. Yeah. And it's amazing because I'm just thinking what made your mom so strong in her faith to not waver from, she did deep dive, right?
She did.
And to figure out what the truth is, right? She almost maybe did what you did before you did. And so, what was your mom's upbringing in her faith to be able to be so strong-willed in her faith, to say, hey, you know what? I'm going to stick to what I believe. What was your mom's introduction to faith?
My mom gave her life to Christ when she was 7. So she has been a Christian for a very long time. And I've asked her about that, of like, did you ever question? Did you think that I was too young? And she's like, no, I knew exactly what I was doing at age 7. And she lost her father when she was 9 years old. And so in many ways, and Jesus was the only father she ever really had. Like God was the only father she ever really had. So for her, she is a natural skeptic. And she questions everything and pushes back on everything. And she will fight you on it too. Until this happened, where she was a skeptic, and therefore she dove into it and found that in fact, I think my faith is even more supported than it ever has been. But this is her husband. This is her family. This is her in-laws. This is now a good group of friends, people that she knows and loves and wants to keep her marriage together. I think we over-romanticize in many ways in the States of being Christian and standing your ground for your faith, speaking so boldly and preaching the gospel and whatnot. And my life and my mom's life were just so opposite to that of like, no, we love these people. What's that going to do to just come and declare it?
Yeah.
This was for her. This was for her faith. This wasn't so that she could then go and try to evangelize anyone.
Right.
And this being her husband, whom she loves dearly and has been a very good man, very good husband, very good father. Like that's a very different situation than just running into somebody. Well, how do I speak to this person that I just met about Christianity? No, this is how do I love my husband?
Right.
And I learned a lot from watching my mom actually embody what is the Christ-like love and not just what is our definition of wifely love. Like, no, she had a very different viewpoint on that. And I thought it was just absolutely beautiful to watch. And she'll be the first to tell you, like, it was not an easy thing to reach. Like she went through a lot of ups and downs and she struggled and everything. So I definitely don't want to paint it out as if my mom's just perfect, But the point being is that she fought for her marriage. And so did my dad. And this came from the two different faiths, two different worldviews.
Yeah.
And so I just learned a lot about what Christianity could be, should be, what it looks like by watching my mom. She never even had to say anything to me.
Wow.
And she didn't. She was very cautious, very respectful to the family and to my father's wishes. Did not want me and my brothers to feel that friction or to feel that tug of war coming from them.
Yeah.
And we didn't. A lot of the tug of war was it was the reality of the situation. It was not because my parents made it so. And again, I'm so grateful to them and grateful to God for setting that up.
Yeah.
It's amazing what the examples of our parents could do for us, and how as children we look at them. And like how daughters look at mothers and sons look at fathers. But I wanted to now shift into getting into your journey on specifically diving into the Bible and the Quran. And the past podcast that I heard you on and your testimony is you dove deep and you went on years of a journey. I'm talking about you studied the heck out of it and in ways that I've never heard of before. And I'd like to say I love to study the Bible. And I was like, man, I have to sit down and just digest this for a second, what you just said. And it's amazing. And I can't wait to hear kind of your journey on that with, I got two questions. One, what similarities did you find the most between the Bible and the Quran? And what differences did you find the most between the Bible and the Quran when you went down your study journey?
Yeah, so at the beginning, I found a whole lot more parallels than the further that I dove. You may hear a lot of people say like, oh, they're very similar. No, they are not. There are a lot of surface concepts that if you just take it from the surface, they do both believe in one God. They're both very dedicated, like very everything that they do is God-centric for both Christians and Muslims. The biggest and most notable difference is their perception of who God is. And that was a very important distinction for me because I didn't know who God was when I plowed into it in the first place.
And you're a 14-year-old girl diving into this.
Yes. So when I was 14, we had a situation in the family that nobody handled it well. And it kind of just stopped the Islam and Arabic lectures up to that point in my life. And so that was at the point in my life where I was just so frustrated with not knowing where I stood on any of this that I decided that I needed to get to the bottom of this. I needed to know what I think of this independent of what anybody else believes or what anybody else thinks. So I asked my father for permission to study the Bible. I told him my plan, that I want to study both. I want to even study other world religions. I need to know where I stand on this. I just told him exactly what I was struggling with. And he gave me permission and requested that I studied Islam first. So I said, fair enough. So my journey started off with Islam, with studying Islam. So first thing that I did is I opened the Quran and I started reading it. I got about 1 or 2 chapters in, was bored out of my mind, and I set it aside. Realized that I'm not understanding a word of this. And that first leg of my research was very much just diving into, okay, what is Islam actually about? I know what I've learned on the assumption that I am Muslim. So now let me just take this on the assumption that it's true, but I don't know anything about it. And you I would encourage a lot of everybody to approach it that way, to think of it as when you're reading it, assume it's true and just study it for what it is.
Right.
Understand it for what it is. At the very least, you will come out of it with an understanding of what others believe. And therefore, you can better understand them. So a lot of my research in Islam was reading other sources. It was reading biography on their Prophet Muhammad. It was reading the stories of the prophets and messengers from the Islamic side. Many of these stories of the Old Testament in the Bible are the same stories, but they're a different take on it. They happened differently according to Islam.
Right.
So I studied that as well. Wanted to better understand that, because oftentimes there's an assumption that you already know it. When you speak to Muslims, they speak to you as if you already know who the prophet is. You already know who these, even reading the Quran, there's an assumption that you already know.
Wow.
I didn't already know.
Yeah.
So throughout all of that, it got to a point where I was like, okay, I'm finding a lot of repeat information now. And honestly, a lot of it boiled down to it was what they thought about Christianity. In the Quran, they believed that Christians worship three gods. They believed that the Bible was tampered with, and that Islam is the correction, like the Quran came to correct the corrupted Bible. And these were all claims that I thought, all right, let's find out. Let's dig into that and see if there's any support for it. So at that point, I switched over into studying Christianity, and I read Genesis. Was bored out of my mind, so I set the Bible down too.
Yeah.
And I guess my point of bringing that up is that these are difficult books.
Yeah.
Our modern minds don't like it. So it is a struggle. But you have to decide that you want the truth more.
Yeah.
And that the truth is more important to me than whether or not I'm enjoying this. And you also have to ask yourself, why am I not enjoying this? Why am I having such a hard time with this? And a lot of that was because I'm starting from level 0.
Yeah.
When you're starting physics from level 0, it doesn't make sense to you either. Like you got to do your time, and eventually you'll learn and you'll grow and you'll understand. Me doing this with two different religions, as well as doing the full world religion study,
Yeah.
it was a lot. It was a lot to cover. And I would argue it was too much to cover. I could study this my entire life and not get to the bottom of it, not
Right.
know everything there is to know about any one of them, let alone about all of them. So this was maybe 3 years into my studies that I kind of took a step back and asked myself a hard question. What are you looking for? And to my surprise, I didn't have an answer. Genuinely didn't know. Why am I doing this? Is it just so that I can feel more confident in where I stand? Is it so that I can tell people, shut up and leave me alone? And through a series of interesting coincidences, I'll leave it at that, I came to the conclusion that I was looking for truth. I wanted to understand reality. What is the world? Why is it this way?
Yeah.
Who am I? What is my part to play in that? I was looking for truth. And the truth boiled down to the identity of Jesus.
Mm.
And what was curious about that realization is that if Jesus, let's say for a second that Jesus is who he claims to be in the Bible, that he was God, the Son of God, died and was resurrected, the rest of it doesn't matter. I can study Islam all my life. It doesn't matter. All the other world religions fall flat. If Jesus is who he claims to be and he died and was resurrected, nothing else matters. That greatly narrowed down the search of, okay, I don't need to study any of this now. Like I know a lot about it, but that's not helping. What was helping was, who is Jesus? I need to get to the bottom of that. And so then that was really where the meat of what I studied started to come to fruition, where the concepts that I was struggling with so much, which a lot of it was because of my Islamic upbringing, I couldn't reconcile the concept of the Trinity. I realized pretty quick that that's not what, like, Christians don't believe in 3 gods. But I could see why Muslims thought that they did though. And so I'm like, all right, well, I need to understand this. What is this concept here that I'm struggling with so much? And there was a lot of concepts like that came out of my upbringing with Islam that was like I don't want to say a retraining. It was let me learn it from another perspective. And then let me just see, but what's actually there? I'm not asking what Christians believe. I'm not asking what Muslims believe. I'm asking what is actually there that's tangible for me to look at. And that was where I started to do the research on the reliability of the Bible and of the stories that have been passed along. And there were so many writings refuting, writings skirting by it, writings that were full blown in support. So many. No book has been further scrutinized 10 times over than the Bible. And yet it still holds up.
Yeah.
Nobody has actually been able to completely successfully refute anything that's in it. Interesting. Again, I haven't even gotten to whether or not it's true yet. I'm just finding that one argument after another is falling flat. And that was a really difficult thing to dive into because, again, there's just so many different perspectives out there. So you read one perspective that contradicts Christianity, you're tempted to just be like, see, it doesn't hold water, until you look at the millions of refutes to that one argument.
Yeah.
And it was not hard to find. It really wasn't. Like, it was Google searches. It was finding various different authors from various different backgrounds. And I read the gamut. I read books by atheists. I read books by Christians. I read books by Christians who lost their faith, by Christians who were atheist and became Christian, by people who didn't have a stake in the game. I read several articles that was by a journalist that was like, I think he was like a Jewish journalist or something, like atheist Jew, something along those lines. But that was the point, though, is whatever your bias, let me know ahead of time so that I know what perspective I'm reading this from.
Right.
And every single direction that I took it from, all of them collectively could not refute the validity of the biblical claims. In fact, all of it was in support of. So when I found just how much support there was for the Bible being exactly what it says it is, like it has not been tampered with, has not been changed, that sets you on a different course now of like, okay, I think I've ruled out everything else because there's no paper trail for anything else.
Right.
This was a hard one for me personally. I was 17 years old when I decided that Islam was not true. And I cried my eyes out that day because that meant there was always going to be that distance from my father.
Right.
That I'm never going to share that with him. I'm not going to have that connection with him. And that hurt because I'm a total daddy's girl.
Yeah.
And that realization came from realizing there is no paper trail to support the claims of Islam. In fact, the paper trail is contradicting it. So that was largely a historical study that disproved Islam to me. And no matter how many other sources I kept finding, it was the same thing. Because I didn't just take that with a grain of salt. I was like, okay, but let me find some other ones, though. Didn't matter. Every angle I took it from, every book I read, every person I interviewed, every perspective and logical thought process that I went to, it all took me down that same extremely conclusive and supported conclusion that Islam was not true. That did not mean Christianity was.
Yeah.
That's a different study. So when I was 17 is when I switched gears to just completely zeroing on Christianity. I'd already decided that the other worldviews did not hold water. Many of them, in my opinion, and from what I was researching, came from a specific time, a specific person, a specific place. They weren't timeless. Truth is timeless. By definition, it's timeless. It would have to be in existence from the very beginning. Christianity was the only one that had the consistent through line. Islam it attached itself to Christianity.
Yeah.
But it has a very specific start date. What was interesting about Christianity is that it was the only one that had a verifiable event attached to it, like a historical verifiable event. The rest of them just kind of say this happened or that or whatever, like, okay, great, you can take it or leave it. But it would be the same thing of just somebody telling you their experience. I'm not docking their experience, but I have no way to verify that happened or not. Christianity is verifiable. And it was the only one that was. The rest of them, you got to there's a certain level of just take it for what it is. Christianity, that happens after. Which I thought was an interesting kind of reversing. You don't have to take it for what it is, and then you'll find all this stuff. There's support and evidence that gets you in first, and then comes the trust and the faith part of it. And everybody's journey is different. For me personally, it was largely intellectual in the beginning. But that was in the beginning when I was just trying to determine if this held any water, if there was any validity to it.
Yeah.
The relationship with God came later. It was, I hear a lot of stories of people coming to Christ through such a beautiful and intense event, like they hit rock bottom and God is the one who saved them and they felt loved for the first time. That was not my situation. I'd always felt loved. I'd always felt valued. I had always felt respected. I was not struggling with self-esteem or I was coming from a place of strength and a place of confidence. So for me, I wasn't looking for a way out. I wasn't looking for a change of life. I wasn't looking for something that I liked or something that suited me. It was literally just the sake of truth for me. Everything else didn't matter.
Yeah. It's amazing because I feel like a lot of times we can get wrapped in the semantics of things, and we never actually sit down and question, like, do I really believe like what I'm setting out to believe right now? Like, do I really sit there and am I fully bought out? You know, did I put in the groundwork? And I honor your faith and your journey to Christianity because you did put in the groundwork. I think at the end of the day, we fail sometimes to actually sit down and plan out things. It's so important, not just in the faith part, but if you want to build a business, if you want to figure out who your true friends are, if you're struggling between, you know, if you're trying to get a boyfriend or this boy, right? We never do this process of elimination. We never put the groundwork in. And I think your story is so compelling because there's a lot of times where I struggle sometimes, like with my faith, because we never always have 100% like all the answers. I don't think God has created an opportunity for us to know everything, because then we wouldn't need faith or we wouldn't need him.
It'd also just be overwhelming. We're talking about the knowledge of God here.
Exactly. Like we're talking about this infinite just wisdom and knowledge that we can't comprehend naturally. And so how did your father take it? How did your father take it? Like when you had that conversation with him? And
I think, first of all, I think it's amazing that he just allowed you to have your own journey. Like, that's amazing. Because I'm assuming that most people of the Islam who practice the Muslim, like, they would never allow that. Like, you would probably be shunned, or like, I mean, I'm assuming, right?
Not only would most of them not allow it, but the kid wouldn't want it.
Yeah.
Like in all of the family and friends that I have, like they're very devout. Like if Christians had half the devotion that some of these Muslims do,
right? No, yeah,
sure.
It's been really humbling, I think, in many ways, to see just how devout they are. And I, again, grew up in a great family. Like all my family is very loving, and I'm really close with everybody. And I've witnessed a lot of different scenarios with everyone's lives. To my knowledge, nobody else has really questioned. You know, they're very devout. Like this is it. So I don't think they don't really have to deal with it. You know, and my situation was also unique because I wasn't being a rebel. I think it's one thing when you feel like your kid's just rebelling or they're going off the deep end, if you want to put it that way. I was being a respectful and loving daughter. I didn't go do this behind my father's back. The kinds of things most 14-year-olds are doing behind their parents' backs, you know, and I went straight to my dad and was like, here's what I'd like to do. Here's what I'm struggling with.
That's so honorable. Like, that's so honorable. Like, you went to your dad and said, hey dad, I need to sit you down. I need to talk to you. I really want to do this. And we've had a previous guest who didn't have a great experience with having growing up in a Muslim household, and hearing your dad first and foremost putting love before anything to his daughter is amazing. It's amazing to hear, and it shatters stereotypes too. It shatters stereotypes that the people that do devote themselves to the Muslim faith, that they're just hard-nosed, violent, like...
We have a lot of those in Christianity too.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly
That's another thing too, is that like we want to be so quick on kind of throwing that like hypocrisy stone. Yeah. It's like, dude, just come over to this side of Christianity, you'll see a lot of hypocrisy as well. I mean,
people are always going to be people, regardless of what walk of life they come from or what their supposed beliefs are. And all of us are still growing. Like, even as the most dedicated actual Christians are still growing in our faith, we're still going to be making mistakes. And that unrealistic expectation is just so not what Christ was teaching us, you know, of like, you remember how he went and dined with a bunch of sinners? Like, we're all falling short, all of us. When did this happen that Christians have this perception that these other people are the ones that are misbehaving and we are so devout? Like, no, we have a lot to learn from Muslims in that regard. Also their unity, like they're a very unified group of people, that they also, many of them, my family included, would be the first to say, like, those Muslims over there don't represent me. That's not my faith. And I learned that also while I was doing my research. Do not judge any of this based on what you've seen people do, Muslims and Christians alike. Because I've seen great stories and horror stories from both sides. Does not make it any less or more true. just
Sure.
because people are ruining it for the rest of us.
So let me ask you then, like, it obviously came down to the event of the resurrection.
Mhm,
Like, what was it that you're like, this solidifies it?
mhm.
Like, this is true. There had to be a moment where it's like, this is true. Like, I'm curious because I don't have 12 years, nor am I as intelligent and as into research as you. But like, I'm genuinely curious. What was that moment where you were like, this is the truth and this is why this is
Mhm.
why this is the truth?
So it really wasn't a moment for me. It was a series of things. For one, I had the hindsight benefit of over the course of these 12 years, looking back and realizing that every question that I had, everything I needed, was conveniently provided the moment I needed it in this book that somebody randomly recommended to me. Like, looking back, I can see God's hand. He didn't throw the whole thing in the kitchen sink at me all at once. It was, where are you at right now? Here's what you need.
Yeah.
So when I was really struggling with, okay, I really don't understand this Trinity concept, I somehow randomly ended up with a book this thick, super, super tiny book called Experiencing the Trinity. And that book, single-handedly, I got it. Like, it just clicked. I understood the concept. I don't know if I believe it yet, but I can't say that the concept didn't make sense, which was what I had heard up to that point. The Trinity doesn't make sense. They made it up. It was added later. The word's not even in the Bible. I'm like, well, it's not, but the concept is in the Bible. Trinity was the way that we did our best to describe it, to describe a concept that is in the Bible. So that was kind of revelation number one, was the realization that there is sense here. If you look for it and you are genuinely trying to understand it, it is there. And furthermore, it's mind blowing. This wasn't just okay, I get it, and you set it aside. This was like this kind of changes everything kind of revelation. And especially for me coming from a Muslim background. And then the second thing that happened was, yeah, but why though? Like, okay, all of this is clicking. I'm not seeing contradictions. I'm leaving space for maybe I don't understand, because that definitely came up a lot at the time. Again, I'm a teenager. I'm in my early 20s. I'm like, I'm leaving space for my own stupidity here.
Yeah.
I may not understand everything that I'm looking into. But just because you don't understand something doesn't mean that it doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
I don't know that I will ever understand physics. I'm not. My brain doesn't work that way.
I feel
Does it
that.
make it any less true? No. But you need to know that about yourself. So you're cutting yourself some slack and you're looking in the right direction so that you're not just getting frustrated. And so I'm not relying on anybody to tell me, yes, this is how it is. So I did it very question-based. And the last question that I had was, why though? Like, all of this seems like it works and all that, but why? Why did it have to go down this way? Why the entirety of the Bible? Why this big, long, over the course of how many thousands of years, over the course of how many authors? How many different people needed to touch this? And then Jesus shows up and dies on the cross. And like, let's say for a moment that he died and was resurrected. Why though? What is the point of it? It seems needlessly complex and elaborate. What are we doing here, God? And then like within a day, I end up with this book called The Cross of Christ by John Stott. It was a heavy book. It was thick. It took me a long time to get through it because it was just a lot intellectually. It was way above my level. But this author broke it down to answer that precise question. But why though? And what ended up coming out of that book, the big thing, was not just an understanding of why it had to happen the way that it did, what the purpose of this was, but it helped me understand two concepts. One was what is sin? What it actually is. We as Americans, and probably just this entire generation, tend to view it as just, you do something wrong, it's a sin. No, the concept of sin, I highly encourage everybody to do a definition study on that word. We have no clue just how egregious it is, just how deep it goes. And there are so many things we're doing on a regular basis that are not even clocking as sin because we don't understand the concept. We don't know what it means. So that book helped me understand the gravity of sin and the detriment of pride. At this point in my studies, I was already kind of going the route of, this is looking like it's true. I'm pretty sure this is true. I think this is true. Oh no. And my life's flashing before my eyes of like thinking I'm going to lose everything. I'm going to divide my family in half. At that time, I didn't know what was going to happen. It had the potential of ruining everything. And not just for me. Like, this wasn't a decision that if I make this choice, what's going to happen to me? No, this was like is it going to divide my parents? Is this the moment? I just didn't know. What is this going to do to my brothers? Is there going to be additional pressure on them now to be Muslim? There were just so many things that it was going to disrupt, and a lot that I had to lose. So I didn't want it to be true. I was hoping it wasn't. Everything that I was researching was like, okay, this makes sense, but there's got to be more. Okay, this makes sense, but there's got to be more. Okay, fine. I guess this all supports it, but let me read this other refute really quick though. And that was kind of how it was going towards the end for me, was I was looking for anything that might actually disprove this. And on the contrary, everything I found just continued to support it. So by the time I got a hold of this particular book, I didn't know what was holding me back. I had already come to the conclusion that so be it. If this ruins everything, this is the one thing I'm willing. I don't want that, but it's the one thing in my life that I'm willing to lose everything over. It's too important. It is the utmost importance. So when I realized that wasn't it, that wasn't the thing that was holding me back, this book is what helped me to identify that it was pride for me that was holding me back. And pride is one of those sins that our culture does not acknowledge.
Right.
That we live with it our whole lives, even as Christians, don't even know it's there.
Yeah.
But it is a huge factor in something that separates us from God. Don't worry, God, I got this. The amount of times that I've prayed, God, don't worry about me. I'm fine. Go help those other people. Just even a simple prayer like that is indicative that what do you mean you think you're fine? What do you mean you think you don't need God, or he doesn't need to come and help you or be there like he is your life? You wouldn't be here doing any of the things that you're doing without him. And that kind of being one level of it, but on a deeper level, there was a fear there of losing my own reputation. Again, I mentioned that I was coming from a place of strength, a place of confidence. And even within this realm, nobody knew more about this stuff than I did.
Yeah.
Everybody I talked to, like, yes, come talk to me. I have your answers. It was even in that regard, it was becoming more about me and my knowledge and what I did this study. Did you do that study? And the more that was filling me, the more friction that's pushing God away, because now it's based on my knowledge, not based on God's knowledge, not based on what he revealed to me. And ultimately, I did not want to lose my status within the family and not just the family, but let's be real. As soon as you declare you're Christian, everybody views you as 10 notches stupider. You're just viewed as an idiot now.
Yeah.
Because you believe in this nonsense, and welcome to the 21st century where we don't have a culture that's very supportive or encouraging of Christians.
It's getting worse. Yeah.
Yeah. You can be anything else, but don't be Christian. That's the worst thing you can possibly be. And then coming from the Islamic background as well, I know how they're going to view me. And I was enjoying a very privileged and respected position, I was that kid that could do no wrong. I was the golden child, that everything I touched was just, turned to gold. And I was crushing life. I genuinely felt like I had this thing called life. No, I didn't. And God had to break down that barrier in me in order to get to me. This was just the first step. I wish it didn't take 12 years, but that 12 years humbled me. That 12 years changed my perspective. That 12 years got me to the point where I was my mind had been blown so many times by all the different angles that I had taken it from. And then it was finally at a point that I was ready to truly just give myself to God. And that was what was missing. Yes, it was true, but was I willing to choose it?
Yeah.
Did I want it to be mine? Was I ready to make that commitment to pick up the cross and follow Christ? Those verses mean a lot to me because I know what that means. I had to be willing to lose everything, which I did stand to lose, and I had to be willing to give up my own pride. And it was not until I realized that was the thing that was holding me back that I was able to make that choice. And that choice was not, like I was saying, it was not any one thing. It was like this buildup of several different things. The day that I actually became Christian was not special. Nothing different happened on this day. It was the first time that I'd ever gone to church. I had just woke up one morning and was like, I've been to the mosque. I've never been to church. Let me just go check it out. Let me see what it's about. So I call up a friend of mine who's a worship leader at one of the churches here. And she's like, yeah, come on down. When I'm done, I'll come sit with you. And, I'm a composer.
Yeah.
Did not like the music. And I'm sitting through the sermon, and I've done this study. So my brain's going critical. I'm like, yeah, but what about this though? Yeah, but what you fail to realize, Mr. Pastor, is, like I'm doing the pride thing again instead of just listening to the guy. So I'm picking apart this poor guy's sermon only to find out that he wasn't the normal pastor. He was a guest pastor. So it wasn't the pastor. It wasn't the sermon. It wasn't the music. It wasn't the building. And then at the end of the sermon, he asks, does, if anybody here would like to give their lives to Christ, let's repeat after me.
Right.
And what was interesting about that is not coming from a Christian background or a Christian culture or anything. I had no idea how to do it. I didn't, where do you sign up to be Christian? I always joke with people, I'm like, is this an online application? Like, what do you do? How does one become Christian? So I think what needed to happen that day was he walked me through the prayer. And it was not a deliberate decision. I just did it. It just happened.
Yeah.
And then I got about halfway through the prayer and then just bawled. I started crying my eyes out, and I am not a crier. I'm not an emotional. I approach this so intellectually. Obviously, I'm not a very emotional person. I could not rein it in. Like, I was just a mess. So I leave the sanctuary, and I'm in the bathroom and I'm just a mess, just crying my eyes out, and finally get myself together. And I'm texting my friend, like, I need you to come out right now. So she comes down and she's just like, I don't know what to do. But what was more interesting things, this particular friend, I grew up with her. We were kids together, and my father, had a big part to play in her and her siblings' lives. Like, he was, I would say more, for a time kind of adopted them, like took them under his wing and treated them as if they were his own children. They are like a second father to him. This particular girl just so happened to be the one that was there when I became Christian. The one person who understood the gravity of what I was going through. Wow. The one person who understood my situation and loves my father as well.
Yeah.
And she was the one that was there as this all unfolded. So to this day, I don't think that, like, that was not a feeling that I had. I'm like, I don't know how else to explain it except to say, like, my soul came back. No, because they were not tears of emotion. It was like my body just did not know how to react to this, whatever was going on. Right. And I always hold to that of being like the one bizarre experience that I had that kind of just cinched it for me. Of like, yeah, this is where it's at. Has not happened since. Nothing even close has happened like that since. But that one moment was like, this is it now. This is my life. And a lot of Christians will say, like, oh, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace and love. And I did not. I felt resolved.
You feel like your walls came down a little bit?
No. That was another several years of God working on me before that happened. It was just the resolution of, this is it. Yeah. I know now. I've found reality. And oh boy, am I in for it. Like, I'm looking at my future going, I have no idea where this is going to go. Like, as if my work has just begun. Right. It was a sense of resolve, and that was it. And that sense of resolve also came from the very first thought to your question was, how am I going to tell my father? How am I going to tell my father? Yeah. And I knew from the Islamic perspective, this would be viewed as a betrayal. And I may very well lose him over it. At best, we'll have some distance between us. I just didn't know. Again, we've always had a great relationship. We've always been close. And so I wanted to tell him. He needed to know. And I didn't want him to find out through anybody else. I wanted to tell him. So I was a closet Christian for about a year before I did finally tell him. And it went, I think, as best as it possibly could have. He still, obviously, we're still best friends. He's still very much my father, and I'm still a total daddy's girl. And he had just told me that he was glad that I chose God. And of course, it wasn't happy. Like, it was not a happy moment by any means. It was disappointing, and it did hurt him. And that was hard for both of us. And I want to just reinforce that it was super difficult for him. Yeah. From his perspective, he's losing his daughter. He didn't know what that was going to turn me into. And for him, Islam is where it's at. And I wanted to be respectful of that, because I knew that's how this is for him. That's how he's coming at this. And I wanted to make it abundantly clear to him that he's not going to lose me. I am still here. I am still your daughter. Yeah. And he did the same thing. made it abundantly clear. He's my
Wow.
father. He's still here. He still loves me. And it's been 6-7 years now, I think, since I told him, and we haven't talked about it. We kind of just leave it where it's at.
Yeah.
We're both content to do so. I think it's what needs to be. I hope that someday we'll actually be able to have a conversation about it, but I also recognize that it's a tough one. It's a really, really difficult one. I think any Christian who has a child that chose something else, you got to put yourself in that position, to be able to respect what your child decided, even though you're like, but this is where life is at, though. He felt the same way from his perspective.
So what about your brothers? Because I know you're like super close with them.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine this has at least sparked some sort of, I better do some research, or no.
You know, what was funny is the whole time I was doing this research, my brothers just kept telling me, yeah, whatever you decide, I know you'll be right.
You'll figure it out for us, sis. Go ahead, do the research.
I think your brothers found out that there's leaders and there's followers in this world. I was like, sis, you're the leader.
And they were perfectly content with that. Like, you do the work.
You do the research.
It's all fine with me. But yeah, they're both atheist agnostic, I guess would be a best way to say it. They struggle with many of the same things that I do, and we talk about it a lot. My brothers and I have actually had a lot of really good conversations, but they struggle with different things than I did. And they're different people. They're what they need. It's not the same thing as what I needed. I feel fortunate that I knew what I needed and I attacked it. I think they don't know. They don't really know what they need. And a lot of our conversations have been very enlightening to understand, generally speaking. I think a lot of people are probably struggling with very similar things. So they kind of decided we're not going to pick anything. Like they didn't want either side. They've straddled the line. I've straddled the line for a long time as well. And even to this day, we're all very much, we feel very both. We feel very, again, bringing it back to that child of two worlds concept. We've all embraced that of we're not picking sides.
Yeah.
And I think they were surprised because from their perspective, they felt like I did. Like I picked a side. And it wasn't until several years later that they voiced to me that they were actually afraid of losing me too. Because from what they've seen and heard of other Christians, they're like, yeah, they just go and barricade themselves in the church and their whole life is church. And I'm like, yeah, those people bother me too. You know? Like I thought we were supposed to go out in the world and, you know, and be Christians out amongst the general population, not just barricade ourselves in the church. Yeah. So, but I didn't think of that. I was so concerned about my father that it didn't occur to me that maybe my brothers would be afraid to lose me. And so that was a really good conversation for us to have when they realized, oh, we're not though. Like it's been several years. And if anything, we've gotten closer.
Yeah, that's good.
So,
well, what about your mom? Because I'd imagine like you guys now get to have this like bond. I'm imagining you get to have you guys' own conversations in time where you talk about these things. I'd imagine she's prayed for you for years and years and years. And so for her, this is probably like answered prayer, you know, and
yeah, my mom, again, God bless her, she too understood the situation. She knew that like as much as she wants me, you know, to be saved, that's a long road ahead of me. And that these are, again, all people that we both love, that we're going to be hurting. And for her, it's different because she married into it. For me, it's personal.
Yeah. I
am in this family. Like this is my father. This is my family that we're talking about, not somebody who's viewed as an outsider that joined the family. So the hurt that my decision would cause is very different than her position. And she was always just so aware of that and so respectful of that like she wasn't as happy as she was. She did not view this as a moment to celebrate. She viewed this the same way I did. It's time to buckle down. Like we've got work to do on God's behalf. Let's get busy kind of thing. Yeah. So don't get me wrong. Like she was absolutely, how can you not be excited? How can you not be thrilled? But it's a lot harder to be openly excited when you know that your spouse is hurting over the same thing. Yeah. And that just throws that wrench into the whole situation of viewing it, trying to view it the way God's viewing this situation instead of the way that we felt in the moment. And having my mom has just been such a godsend. And then the recognition that my mom was alone. She was a loner in this whole situation, being the only Christian. I
mean, but do you think that you would have even like thought about Christianity if it wasn't for your mom? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like if she wasn't like, you may never have even went on this journey.
Mhm.
It would have just been like that. That's like the
Like,
it's
that's just my
Muslim
life.
faith. Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
my reality. I've never really considered that of what
Yeah.
what a different trajectory my life would have gone on if not for her. All I can say is that when I did go on this journey, I noticed everything that her and my father did.
Mm.
And neither one of them turned me off, put it that
Yeah.
way, turned me off to their respective faiths.
Wow.
Yeah.
I felt that they were both amazing examples of the best of what their faiths had to offer. And so it wasn't them. This was truly God moving in me.
Yeah.
God called me and here we are, I think my mom was just like, God knew that I needed that. He knew that I needed to see this done right
Yeah.
so that nothing else was going to sway me. This isn't my mom's being a terrible person and my dad's this, beacon of respect and honor. So obviously Christianity isn't true. Like when I look at all of the different things that were set up in my life, I had no excuses. There was nothing that I could look at and say, well, yeah, see, that's why I chose this over here instead of Christianity. And I would be curious to know how many other people would have situations like that, where if they look back on their faith and look back at the details of their life, the fact that I grew up in such a loving home with two amazing
Yeah.
parents that I love both of them dearly,
Yeah.
with such a fantastic family that I'm super close with, my brothers, my cousins, my aunts and uncles, like from both sides, like we're a dream family in that
Sure.
regard, not that we don't have our struggles and
Sure.
and all that, but coming from such a loving home, there was no other reason why I would choose Christianity except to say that it's true. And that's important to Muslims because one of the things they will often say is, oh, don't pick what's easier. From their perspective, Christianity is easier than Islam. Oh, well, pick what's better. From their perspective, Islam is the correction of Christianity. So obviously it's better. Like when you understand how Muslims think and what are some of the things that hold them back or that create those walls between them even considering Christianity as a viable option, all of those barriers were non-players in my story because of the way God set it up.
Yeah.
And it just makes me wonder if like I needed to see that. Other people maybe not, but for me, I needed
Right.
everything else to not matter because I was looking for truth.
Wow. I'm like, this has been one of my favorite episodes. For
Yeah.
Sure.
No, it kind of sheds light on a topic we don't get to talk about much, but we do want to talk about it, which has to do with faith. And I think you're a great example of courage, of putting in the work when it needs to be done, following your convictions, because none of this would have been possible. I mean, none of this would have been, you wouldn't have done any of this if you didn't follow that conviction, that innate conviction inside of you to find the truth of it all, right? To find the meaning in it all. And I think that's such a great example to us as Christians, or if you're atheist, or if you're Muslim, or you're struggling with faith, is that you got to do the work yourself. You can't go and listen to somebody else and say, just because you believe, I believe, because they could be believing something that is totally false, and they've led you astray, or now you believe in them as being something perfect, and then they do something that's totally human and it's stumbling. And I think you would probably appreciate this saying, and I always use it when we encounter a Christian who is living in their flesh and they play Jesus badly. And it's like, do you blame the person? Do you blame Beethoven, or do you blame the musician who plays Beethoven? Right? You blame the musician. You blame the person who played it badly, as like, dude, you messed up this masterpiece here. Okay, and that's kind of sometimes how we look at people, and especially when we're struggling with faith, and we see a Christian not living the way he's supposed to be living, not living the reflection of Jesus Christ, not maybe having the intention to live a Christ-led life, and they live in their flesh, but we don't have the humility or the understanding to know that that person's not perfect, right? And we look at God as being not perfect, but he is perfect, right? And we know that he can deliver him as much as he can deliver me, but we're just trying to do the best we can here. You know what I mean? And I think you did such a great job on being that example for us to go and do the work and be fully sold out into reaching that finish line and saying, you know what? it's finished. Like what Christ would say, it is finished. I did the work. I did what I was supposed to do, and I can lay my head down at night knowing that I followed my convictions. And so, it's such an inspiration. And do you have anything else?
I just want to know like what's next, because now you got all this information, right? like what's next? Obviously, this is coming from a completely different mind frame and headspace as all the, the knowledge that you've gained over the last 12 years. Like that's a decade plus.
Yeah.
So like, what's next now that you have this information? You obviously, you made a profession of faith publicly, right? At Red Rocks, which is how all this is even possible. And we're seeing this, right? That one moment of saying, I'm going to do this. So like, what's next now that you have all this really good insight to offer people? And dude, you speak incredible.
You need to speak.
Yeah.
Like
that's what you need to do.
You should be speaking on stages. And I'm telling you, the way you communicate is a gift. That's a gift from God. Not many people have that ability to communicate and articulate the way that you do. It's really good. But
Thank you so much.
what's next? Like,
You've inspired me to get in apologetics, because you were talking about apologetics on Red Rocks, and I remember talking about it. I remember thinking about it, and I get busy and I end up doing something else. It's like, no, I really want to dive into this. So you're inspirational in a sense that you need to be on stages and you need to speak, and we want to know what's next if you have any inspirations of that.
Yeah, I've thought about it so many times in so many different angles and directions, and I've prayed about it so many times. And for me, I've always just kind of like gone with the flow. Like whatever, like I don't consider myself an ambitious person, despite what it may look like. It's more of I'm just doing stuff. Like yeah, sure, let's write a book. Like, yeah, sure, let's compose something. Okay, cool. Let's do this podcast. Okay, like, and I've often viewed that as like, now being Christian, I want to keep it that way, so that God's the one that's opening the doors, and I'm just
walking
wherever you'd like me to go. Here's where I'm going. Redirect me if this is not where you want me to be. And the one thing that I can say has definitely come out of all of this and come out of my research and all that has actually been speaking to Christians.
Yeah.
It's been these one-on-one conversations that I've had with people that find out what my background is, and that inspiration, they often will say the same thing of that's making me want to go and deep dive my own faith now that I know it's possible. Like, it's a thing. You can do that. There's options. It's not as overwhelming as I thought it was. I think the facts that I did it the way that I did it, my hope is that it will bridge gaps of understanding for Christians when they're reaching people that are not their faith, that are not Christian. And the reason I say that is because I feel like so many times you're actually pushing people away from the faith. Not that God is ever limited, but I do feel like we oftentimes don't help because we just didn't do this. We can't back ourselves up.
Right.
We can't, every little thing that comes up is a challenge to our own faith. Our lack of strength in our own faith has been so debilitating for the American Christian.
Yeah.
And again, when you come from the Islamic background and you see the strength of their convictions, when I don't believe that what they believe is true, it's hard to see that. It's hard to see that and then watch your fellow Christians just flounder. So I don't know if being on stage or, like there's a lot of really phenomenal speakers that I have learned from, coming from that regard. To me, if that is the path, it's going to simply happen. I do not feel that it is what I should pursue unless that's the door God opens for me. What I feel like I should pursue is to continue to write, because that's where I got my value from.
Do you want to write a book about your journey?
I do. And I want to go into detail on what books I read, who I learned from, what were my sources. Yeah, I have a whole Google Doc that's really all good. Just my bibliography.
Yeah, that would be good.
So yeah, I mean, I keep it kind of light for the conversations and not trying to bog anybody down, but like I can list you out exactly what were all the things that I looked at and what I learned from each one of them as well.
But I bet there's a lot of people who are in similar situations like you who could benefit greatly, whether it's Islam or any faith that they may, be growing up in. I know a lot of people, even the Catholic Christian religion, like they grow up Catholic and they get super turned off. They're like, I don't like, they don't ever go to church anymore because they're super turned off by the Catholic religion, whatever happened to them. Right. So I think just the overall faith journey
Mhm.
of that that will be. I can't wait to read that book or audiobook, one of the two. Because
Please make it an audiobook.
yeah.
I'm logging a
That
bunch
is
of
the goal.
miles right now, and I'm just like, man, this is so cool. I get to like read and run at the same time, and it's just.
Mhm.
But
Well, one thing that I would want to, like that is the reason I'm so cautious about it. One of the people that helped me a lot after I became Christian was Nabil Qureshi. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with him, but he was also a Muslim who became Christian. And he went right into, like, his whole family is Muslim. No sooner did he become Christian than he got baptized. He starts writing books. He's a PhD. He's speaking on stages. And I don't know too much about what happened with his family, but that was like, if I could have asked him any question, that would have been it. Is you immediately jumped into you being the one that's doing the apologetics. You've got a family that you're right there. And so to me, I'm like, as much as I would love to help everybody else, I'm like, I'm plopped into a family here, and I love my family dearly. And I don't want my aspirations, of like, oh, I could help so many people. I want to get out there on stage and everything. And then I'm turning off my own family in the process. I'm betraying my own family in the process. Not saying that that's what it would be, just that it's something that I'm cognizant of because of my specific situation.
yeah,
And which is why I'm so careful about it. Of like, yeah, it's 7 years of being Christian before I got baptized, before I publicly mentioned it to anybody. It's like, I didn't want that to be how my family finds out. I respect them too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to be able to tell them. And if I can't, it is what it is, but I didn't want it to be this, again, it's a betrayal anyway. And I can't harp on that enough, that when you're choosing something that's not your family views it as a betrayal. And that's hard ground to navigate.
I didn't think about how you'd have to be considering your father too, and how he feels, because he's going to be see you on that stage, and so
I did not want it to be anything that I didn't want him to hear, that I didn't want him to know.
I think a book would give you a great opportunity to express it how you want to be able to express that journey, versus like getting put in the spotlight on stage and then it's like, oh, I just said that or whatever, whatever. I can't. Yeah, no, that's well, this has been an incredible episode for me, and just hear you, like Kirk said, I think it's like, it challenges me to like, these questions and these thoughts that I have, like, the research is out there, do it, or look into it and put a little.
Don't be scared.
Yeah.
People are so scared.
yeah.
Like, no, don't be. The answers are there, and they will support your faith.
This is your life. Go take it by
Go
the
get
reins. Yeah, go take it by the reins
Love
and
that.
go get after it. And this is one thing that I think a lot of people need to really focus on, because it literally leads your life on how you raise. If you have a family one day, how you raise your kids.
It changes everything.
Yeah.
How you love your wife, how you love your husband, how you see life, how you see truth, how you see everything, how you treat one another. It's ultimately the root of who you are at the end of the day. And I love that even in your intelligence, you've learned the humility part, because you could be a crazy monster of a brainiac and use everything you just learned as a weapon to go and deceive if you wanted to. But you learn this humility, and you learn the love aspect of Christianity and the humility of accepting Christ. And now it's like you're using it for good, and you're using it to inspire, and you're using it to help a community out there that we don't really recognize, which is the ones that are juggling between two faiths. And so thank you so much, Yasmin, for being on here. Everybody,
Thank you for having me.
Go check out the Crimson Run, and
tell them about where they can buy it,
Yeah.
and anything you want them to know about this, and your final message to anybody who's listening, maybe in a similar situation, or just your final message to like our audience who has heard everything and maybe on their own faith journey as well.
For sure. So you can get the Crimson Run online on Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, pretty much any online store. My preference would be Amazon.
Yeah.
Leave a review, buy it,
Please leave a review. Yes, it would help me greatly. Honest review. And my closing statement here would be to anyone that is juggling, do not be afraid to dive in. Do not be afraid of what you're going to find. Because what you're going to find is Christ. What you're going to find is your own confidence. You're going to find your identity, and you're going to find that surety that you are actually walking the path with your Creator. And you can't get that from any other way than you diving into it yourself and recognizing that everything you think you know is probably not correct. That approaching it with the humility and with the courage of, I might be wrong and that's okay. Would you rather go your whole life believing in something that is you kind of believe it, but maybe don't? Or do you want to know for sure and live your life with that level of confidence? And this is the only way to do it, is to go get it, go find it and dig into it. And I highly encourage you to do so. And if anybody does have any questions or you need a resource that might be helpful along the way, please reach out to me. I'm happy to answer.
Yasmin, thank you. That's amazing. Guys, if you like this episode of the Get Back Podcast, like, comment, subscribe, turn your notifications on, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Peace.